Now, I was really curious about what your thoughts were, because like Germany seems to have this aura, this presence to others of being so sex positive, and Austria is right next door. So that was one thing I was curious about, was what the overall perception of sexuality was, since we see that Germany, we think that Germany maybe is
I
so
mean, in
progressive.
general, it is. Like, I would
Mhm.
say Germany, like, if we're talking about whole countries, and of course, any Germans listening to this be like, no, Germany is, any country is going to be multifaceted. But in general, if you look at countries around the world, Germany is in general one of the most progressive when it comes to sexuality, along with like Denmark,
Mhm.
probably, and possibly the Netherlands. But again, there's a lot of nuance there because
Mhm.
the Dutch government is actually super conservative.
Yeah.
Um, it's weird. Whereas Austria, I think it's strange because I live in Vienna, and so Vienna it's a metropole and it's very international. You've got a UN headquarters here, you've got a university here, so Vienna's always been a bit of a bubble. But something that is very typical of Germanic cultures is nudity is more normalized.
Mhm.
So, like in Vienna's got really beautiful architecture. And I met up with a friend when I first moved here, and we were sitting by a cafe, and I looked up and there was a statue, just a generic statue in a building, and there was a penis. I'm like, this, like, it was just normal.
Uh-huh.
And even, hey, you don't really see many statues of penises. And she's like, this is normal. This is just has a penis. Or like when we first came to Vienna to go flat hunting, we were in a bar restaurant and it was lovely. And I looked and I saw the painting, whatever, and it was like three naked people with cocks out. And I was like, this is, they allow this? And they're like, yes, this is very, very nice.
It's just a
Beautiful
body.
artwork. It's just the body. And I'm like, I'm here for this. Um, and also in Austria and lots of Germanic countries, you go to sauna and you have to do it nude. It has to be nude.
Mhm.
And I actually went to a spa with some friends the other week, and it was a women only night. And most of the women there were nude. And some were wearing bathing costumes, but it wasn't, this is just a thing, or
Mhm.
not a thing. It would be different if it was mixed gender, because even Austrian women would feel uncomfortable maybe being nude around men or male-bodied folk. But
Mhm.
I think it's strange. I think in general, it's much more matter of fact here.
Mhm.
Um, if you're thinking about sex positivity, there's obviously a way to go, just like there is in many places.
Mhm.
Um, Also because I came from Brighton, which Brighton is in the UK, which is its own bubble.
Like the San
Um,
Francisco of the United States is very queer friendly and mhm.
Brighton is the San Francisco of the United States, basically. So I forget that. It's difficult to say yet because I haven't lived here long enough to get a feel for it. And somebody who is Austrian will probably feel differently. And also, if you're from a small Austrian village, the mentality is very, very different. So, from what I hear, a lot of the Austrian towns and villages, it's also Austria is a Catholic country,
Mm.
and some
Mhm.
places are super Catholic.
Yeah.
So, it's a roundabout way of saying swings and roundabouts. But also, what's interesting here, I've seen a few kind of women's health clinics and reproductive clinics
Mm.
and basically abortion clinics as well. And they're not hidden. There's no fences outside. There's no protesters outside. And that's interesting. I have seen some pro-life charities with their horrible posters up.
Mhm.
Um, but apart from that, that's another interesting thing. I think the abortion laws here are fairly relaxed.
Mm.
Long may they stay so. I hope I could be wrong.
Yes, long may they stay so is a good way to put it, because
May they
I'm
stay so.
in the United States. I am in the state of Missouri, which Missouri likes to make headlines for all the wrong reasons. We were the very first state to have our abortion trigger law go into effect when the Dobbs decision came down.
Mm.
They are trying to, in Arkansas, just the
Mm.
state south of us, criminalize miscarriage, basically.
Oh my God.
They're
Oh,
trying to I just found this on TikTok yesterday and made a video about it, but they are trying to make a law that, to say that there's, I don't know how they were actually trying to put it now that I'm thinking about it, but like anytime a law is trying to make the distinction between a lawful or natural miscarriage versus an unlawful or unnatural miscarriage, what that means is the state, the government has the right to investigate anybody and anything. And if you can't prove that you didn't cause your miscarriage, then you're criminalized.
Yeah.
I wrote an article in 2019 about, I titled it, "Could I Have Gone to Jail for My Miscarriage?" Because in 2009, when I found out that I was pregnant, I did some Google searches to like, how do I induce a home miscarriage? How do I make myself have an abortion at home? Things like that, because I was not ready. In the month that we had decided to try, we had had some conversations and realized some things had changed in his perspective of how he wanted to raise kids. And I was contemplating, like, maybe I just need to get back on the pill, and then found I was pregnant. It took me 1 month to be off the pill to get pregnant, even though they tell you it can take years. And I happened to have a spontaneous miscarriage at 6.5 weeks. But if the local authorities had had the power to check my search history, it would have sent me to jail. And people thought I was crazy in 2019 when I wrote that article questioning whether or not I could have been criminalized for that. And now here we are.
Yeah, because people I don't know, this is something I have to be really mindful of my own stress levels, which I think all of us do, because it can send me to a really dark and angry place, because a lot of people are just, it's not just about the laws themselves, that people are so ignorant about them, thinking, well, it wouldn't happen to me. It doesn't, if you have a miscarriage, no, it does. This is a very legal gray zone. And even in the UK, at the moment, our current Minister for Health is Maria Caulfield, and she's pro-life. Like, she was part of a Conservative pro-life committee, and she's not as virulent as some politicians, and she's also a former nurse. But she's made lots of tweets about why we shouldn't be criminalizing protesters, because they're not harassing women, they're just trying to talk to them. And she's, any time the UK Parliament has voted on issues around abortion, she's always voted in the negative. And now she's the Minister for Health, specifically for women's health as well. And that's really worrying. And I think what's difficult having these conversations with people who come from countries that are not the US is that, well, no, it would never happen here. No, we can never be complacent. I don't care how liberal your country is. This shit can happen anywhere.
The pendulum can swing real fast.
The pendulum, it can swing because, and I think what's difficult is when you and I, we know what language to watch out for. So like I shared on Instagram when my husband sent me because we're on the underground, and my husband sent me a picture of one of those pro-life posters from an organization that is, to give them credit, less aggressive and shouty than others, but they are still pro-life. And I shared on Instagram, and one of my friends, bless him, he said, no, Lucy, that could be libel, because no, they're obviously not pro-life. And I said, no, I'm really sorry. I Googled it. I reached out to a sex educator friend, and I was explaining to him, they don't have to call themselves pro-life to be pro-life, and explaining there's certain dog whistles, there's certain language that they use. And then he understood that an organization does not have to call themselves pro-life, but by the language that they use, by their political affiliations, by usually association with a religious group, that means they're pro-life, which means XYZ. And I think this is what a lot of people don't understand. Yeah. Which is why it's very dangerous and very insidious.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and speaking of insidious, there's some interesting things we're going to talk about today. But
shaking off some of that heaviness.
Shake it off. Now let's talk about sex scandals and documentaries about some of that insidious shit that's out there. So, but before we get too deep into that, let's take a quick moment and tell the audience a little bit more about you. Welcome to the show, Lucy. May I ask first off, are you going by professionally simply Lucy Rowett, or are you going by? Okay.
So my married name is Lucy Rowett Schnabel, which is on Facebook. But professionally, I'm still Lucy Rowett because my domain name is under that name, and I'm not changing it.
And you built a brand. I'm the same way. I just got married in October, although my ring is at the jeweler. My stone was a little loose. But I'm not changing to Kristen Kusa or Kristen Thomas Kusa because I'm Kristen Thomas. I built the brand. So I totally understand.
Yeah.
But Lucy, tell the audience a little bit more about yourself.
So hi everyone, I'm Lucy Rowett. As you can tell from my accent, I'm from the UK. I grew up in Britain. At the moment, me and my husband, we live in Vienna, Austria. So I am a certified sex coach and sexologist, and my specialty, my passion is helping women and non-binary femmes to really work with helping to release shame and inhibition around sex and pleasure, to have the sex and pleasure that they really want. I especially love working with people from faith backgrounds or from purity culture backgrounds, and or the women, the femmes who identify as overthinking, overworking, overachieving, overfunctioning, and struggle to quote unquote let go and enjoy sex. So these are the women and the people that I really love working with. What else can I tell you about me? I have a whole professional bio that is somewhere else. I'm also the regular I'm the resident sex coach at UK contraception platform The Lowdown, and I am also featured a lot in all sorts of media publications as well. So do reach out to me if you are interested in working together.
Yes, you have been featured all over the place lately, my friend. It's so lovely. I love when I get to share articles about sex in the news in my newsletter, and you are in them.
Yeah. And I love talking with you, Kristen. It's always a pleasure. You will see me sipping my tea because I'm British, but I like my tea.
And like an American, I've got my latte.
I have my water as well. I have the
same. We'll two-fist it today.
What's it, the internet thing where it's like you always have more than one drink. You've got your fun. There's always water and something else. So I've got my tea and I've got my water.
It's critical. You got to stay hydrated, but you got to have a little flavor as you go. Well, listeners, the reason that I have my friend Lucy on today is because there has been a plethora of sex scandals or sex documentaries or sex shows out there, and we wanted to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, what's on all these platforms.
And the ambiguous.
Yeah. So I don't know what to start with today because my goodness, there's some that I've watched, some that you've watched, some we both watched, but there's been a lot of stuff. Again, I had a hysterectomy at the end of November. I got to spend a lot of time just catching up on Hulu and Netflix and some other things. And my husband was laughing like, you just keep watching all these like sex cult documentaries. I'm like, it's fascinating. I can't help it.
I tend to listen to podcasts. So I like listening to cult podcasts as well. I just find it really interesting and fascinating. And we were talking about this before we started recording, that, I have one foot in the wellness, alternative spirituality world. And I have personal experience with a lot of these cult-like high demand groups. And I have friends and colleagues that have either escaped or are still very much in some of them. And it's a really interesting territory for me to navigate.
Yeah.
Personally and professionally.
Yeah, like one of the first ones that came to mind to talk about stemmed from the fact that I had a conversation with someone the other day, and they were trying to get to know me a little bit better professionally. And they asked, with the coaching that you do you do any work with Tantra? And I just said, I don't. It's not that I think it's a closed practice, but I think it's really important, no matter what you're trying to learn, who you get your information from. So to me, the folks that are here in town, like, I don't know. Like, it just seems like there's too many stories about people being a little too blurring the lines of professionalism. Yeah. There is a documentary you turned me onto called Tantra Island: The Search for Sexual Paradise. And that was a Vice documentary. And they went to an island that the reporter went to an island called, probably might botch this, but you know how to say it.
I think
Is
it's
it like
Copenhagen.
Yes.
I could be pronouncing this wrong. I think it's Copenhagen, but I could be pronouncing it wrong.
You're right. I did a phonetic spelling here in my notes, and that was right. But that's in Thailand, and it seems like that's a place where it's not just one center there for tantric exploration. There's multiple practitioners there, and they've just set up their own temples or schools, whatever. And they did address in that some of the abuse that's happened, not just on that island, but within Tantra.
Yeah. So I think it's what was I going to say? My brain has gone off on. I did a few videos on Instagram a while back, because similarly, I get approached every now and then saying, "Can I have a tantra session? Do you do a tantra session?" Because I am very open that I used to do tantra. I used to be more in that scene, and I personally love a lot of the exercises from it. And I think a lot of the exercises are really powerful. In terms of they work often with the body and help take you out of your thinking mind. And I think especially when we're working with sex and sexuality, which is something that happens a lot with the body, in the body, there's only a certain amount of talking that is going to really help. Sometimes we really need to work with the body, especially when most of us are very used to rationalizing. So I really appreciate a lot of it. But I have also witnessed many icky things going on in the world of Tantra that has really turned me off a lot of it.
Yeah.
And what's tricky, that I feel like for me, I have a very middle of the road approach, because I know quite a few practitioners and teachers who I adore and I think are amazing, but that's my personal opinion and experience. And I also, this is me going on a sideline here, when I sent you that documentary, I know lots of people personally and professionally who've been to Koh Phangan, who were either involved in Agama yoga or just went off to Koh Phangan to do the whole finding myself, healing myself thing. And if it's not Koh Phangan, they would have gone to Bali, or they would have gone to Tulum in Mexico. They would have gone to these exotic,
these retreat centers. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's weird every time I've seen that, because first of all, for me, this could have been my life. I could have very easily gone down that path. And what's difficult is what they addressed in the documentary, first of all, is that the ethical line is so grey. And it's a very, very grey zone. But also, I will say this, in one of my friends and colleagues was interviewed, and she said that most of her interview was cut out. And for this documentary, they very much made it a little bit trauma porn, and they very much sensationalized a lot of things. I heard that from other people that were featured, they edited out a certain thing. So for this documentary, they had a certain slant of the edit they wanted to go for. So I think anybody watching that needs to have that awareness, in that they were showing mostly cis, het, mostly white folk who were very slim and attractive and young.
I noticed that too.
Yeah. And like,
I made note of that. I put, there were no Black people.
No. I think one of the teachers is brown, South Asian, but and also, I mean, this is also an issue within a lot of the Tantra world as well. So a lot of this is reflected, and there are also larger bodied folk, people who aren't cis het white, who go, and a lot of I think I don't want to speak for anybody else's experience, but we have to acknowledge that's there, and acknowledge that documentary, they had, it's a towel falling off. They had a very specific angle that they're going for. And I love watching Vice personally, but they do tend to go for a more kind of sensationalist approach. Yeah. So have that in mind when you're watching that.
Yeah. I definitely caught that angle to it. And the fact that they were trying to walk that line between showing, hey, there may be, as you said, things and practices, exercises that are really, really beneficial. But then in practice, sometimes it's the community, the individuals abusing their power. And that you do have to be careful about the misuse of power there. And they did reference like Agama yoga, which if folks listening, if you're not familiar, you can certainly go Google, but
it's one of my colleagues' friends was one of the early whistleblowers about Agama yoga. But I think what a lot of people still in this scene don't always appreciate, and not just the Tantra scene, the spirituality wellness scene, if we're good, because it's never just one scene. A lot of people are very willfully ignorant to a lot of cult dynamics that happen there, because it's very easy to say, well, Agama yoga was just about this one shitty person, or it's people, it's just they're bad people doing this. And I want to say, no, we have to understand human dynamics. Not, I don't know if that's a terminology, but understand that I personally believe a lot of people go into this with good intentions, but end up going down a certain rabbit hole where these good intentions end up falling away.
Yeah.
And it's easy to blame it on, say, no, avoid the bad practitioner, rather than understanding it's a whole ecosystem that needs to be looked at, not necessarily complete. I'm also, I say, I don't like it when people say it's all snake oil, it's all rubbish. No, there's a lot of good stuff in there, but we have to understand the whole ecosystem rather than it's one or few to quote unquote bad people, because then you are massively oversimplifying something and you're missing out the opportunity for stuff to be resolved.
Yes. Well, and as you and I have discussed before, that so many people who are going into the wellness space, the sacred sexuality space, came from religious backgrounds. And oftentimes they're simply replacing one cult mentality for another because it's what they're used to. They're understanding this hierarchy, this leadership structure. They understand this, person has power and they teach because they have knowledge or whatever, that they get used to that dynamic, and it's easy to fall back into it again in the future.
And one of my colleagues was saying that it's guru mentality.
Yeah.
Even if the teacher's saying, I am not your guru, Tony Robbins. No, it's not necessarily calling themselves a guru. It's that mentality of teacher knows best. Always do what teacher says. Push your comfort zone, push your edges, because teacher or leader or coach knows what's best. And that is when it gets to really sticky territory. And this is where a lot of things can go wrong.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these teachers a lot of them don't have any accountability structures. And a lot of them will be, and when we talk about how a lot of the world of Tantra is not trauma informed, in that there is often this mentality of going for a cathartic release, which is we're going to go for a big breakthrough. And sometimes for some people that could be what they need. But it does not work all the time. And often what happens, people get pushed way over their tolerance level and they end up actually regressing or being re-traumatized. And it's also this mentality of teacher knows best, teacher knows best, teacher knows best. And then when you follow that, it ends up going down a very dark rabbit hole.
Yeah. It's that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that's, I think, what was the big issue with the next documentary I want to talk about, The Vow. Now that one it's on Hulu. Lucy can't access Hulu where she's at right now.
Well, I have been listening to the podcast a little bit culty with I think they're called Sarah and Nippy. I could be wrong, but they are two survivors of NXIVM. So so a little bit culty. So they are, so I know what The Vow is about. I haven't seen it, but I listened to a little bit culty, so I get a lot of the gist of NXIVM and Keith Raniere.
There's been a lot of coverage about Keith Raniere and the NXIVM cult. And it did not start off as being a sex cult. It was really this guy trying to do this self-improvement, leadership workshop style thing, but sort of also like multi-level marketing thing.
Put good old capitalism into it.
Oh yeah, right. Can't just be a thought leader, spiritual guru. I don't like the term guru. That's anyone who gives themselves the moniker of guru. I'm just like, bleh. But it also made me look at people like Allison Mack and some of the actresses on Battlestar Galactica a little bit differently. Ooh, that's one of my favorite shows, and I don't know if I can watch it again in the same light, but yeah, that was definitely one of those that it was a man having power, and he was able to utilize that power to manipulate women. And I don't know how much they've talked about it on that podcast, but he was also doing a lot of manipulating around polyamory and open relationships. Now, the Vow didn't focus in that documentary. It was actually on HBO and then featured through Hulu. It didn't hone in on, oh, this guy was saying that he was polyamorous. So I don't feel like they were trying to purposefully give folks that practice open relationships or polyamory a bad name. But they did show this guy was using elements of it, but not doing the ethical part. You know, he was doing the non-monogamy, but not the ethical part. But using everything that he could to manipulate their weight, to manipulate their sexuality, to get them to just give him more and more money. It was gross.
So, you know what's interesting is on A Little Bit Culty, the podcast. Maybe if I shout, I'll be featured on that one day. Maybe. I don't know. But they a few months ago, they did some episodes on this spiritual teacher called Bentinho Massaro. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, because he was a very famous, still is, millennial influencer spiritual teacher. What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah.
Turns out many things have gone wrong. And it's interesting when you're saying that, because all the behavior from Keith Raniere is what Bentinho Massaro has been doing in terms of manipulating a lot of women, manipulating them into polyamory and open relationships without any of the ethical part, getting them to give him more and more money, getting them to follow him, basically becoming more and more just manipulative. And if you can hear some of the stories of people, like women who were in relationships with him, and also men as well, where they just got manipulated, and where, you know, Bentinho would have these, you know, bacchanalian parties. And it's really, I don't know, it's very interesting listening to it. And also that I'm not an expert in cults, but there are people who have studied cults, how humans, no matter where they come from, no matter what economic, cultural, ethnic background, no matter what the cult is supposed to be about, it seems that they follow a very similar trajectory. That cult leaders follow a very similar trajectory. So take heart or don't take heart. Humans be humans. Human dynamics be human dynamics. Humans gonna human. No matter how spiritual or enlightened they say. What was interesting with Bentinho Massaro, which I also know was the thing with Agama Yoga, and I'm guessing with Keith Raniere, was this thing of, if you're triggered by it, it's because you're not spiritually advanced enough. I'm saying this, and I'm doing this for your spiritual growth, which means I can get away with shitty and abusive, manipulative behavior because this is for your growth. And then this is where it has gone very, very wrong.
Yeah, and it's all those people who lead cults know that the people who are following them are folks who are searching for answers. They're searching for something different than what they've had in their past. They often have these holes that they're trying to fill, and they do take advantage of that. You know, thinking about NXIVM originally starting off as this personal growth and leadership program, where it was supposed to help people take control of their careers and their lives and build them up.
I'll have me some of that.
You know, it's like,
no, and it's, I mean, I feel like I'm going to get quite philosophical here, but it's like, this is why we need to have, within any kind of group, whatever the group's aim is, awareness of certain dynamics and having accountability structures in place. Because this is what happens when there's no accountability structures or any kind of way of people saying, whoa, this is not okay. This something is going really wrong here.
Yeah.
Because I remember I read this quote, and I wish I could remember who it was by. And if anybody can remind me, that would be really helpful. And it was, every single dictatorship and or totalitarian regime was started by people who wanted to change the world. and thought that they had the answer for it. Now, obviously, there were all sorts of awful power dynamics and awful stuff that got in the way. But let's not bypass that. But it was often started by, and it hooked people in with this idea that we can create a better world. And I have the idea of how we can create this better world, and I will make other people do it by force. So we need to be aware of that as a dark side to wanting to, this is what can happen sometimes when we want to go really far down that path of changing the world, saving the world, improving ourselves. Not that I ever want to tell people not to want to have that intention, but be aware. This is what can happen if it's left unchecked.
Yes. When you are seeking answers, enlightenment, sacred sexuality, whatever it may be, you have to be cautious of who is disseminating this information. How much am I just getting my information from one person? You know, like this is how people ended up in QAnon, because they were trying to seek answers and they thought that this thing had the answers for them and that nobody else had the right answers. Like if you're getting into that mindset of this thing, this person, this philosophy has all the answers that I need and everyone else doesn't know the truth, nobody else is privy.
And you are then constantly encouraged to view others as less enlightened, less bloody, bloody, blah.
You might be in a cult.
Sticky territory.
Yes. Very, very. Now, I do want to switch gears a little bit and talk more about a sex. Go ahead.
Oh, no.
Okay. Let's talk about a sex scandal rather than a sex cult. Now, I do take a little bit of personal pleasure in watching super duper religious people who are all high and mighty. I love watching them fall. I love watching them fall real hard. So the fall of Jerry Falwell Jr. was incredible. So Jerry Falwell Sr., his father, started Thomas Road Baptist Church in Lynchburg, Virginia. He also founded the Moral Majority in the United States. He's one of the Southern preachers who decided when the civil rights movement was coming along, he picked the side of segregation. Okay, so let's just set the tone here. Jerry Falwell Jr., after his father died, took over his dad's little Baptist college and became Liberty University, like the largest private Christian college, I think, in the US. Yeah. Anytime someone's like, "Oh, I graduated from Liberty University," I'm like, "Oh, well." So what happened with Jerry Falwell Jr., for those that don't know, is he got caught up in a scandal that ended his career, and he and his wife have since been kind of quiet now. But they got outed as being into cuckolding.
Oh.
Now, you and I both know cuckolding on its own, like, so what? No big deal. What a consenting adult wants to do with their consenting adult partner and another third consenting adult, their business, right? Where it becomes an issue is when you are a conservative Christian, when you are a leader of the right wing, and you're doing something that other people do and you judge them for it, you tell them they're sinners, things like that. That's where I started having a big problem.
Yeah, and it's interesting because for listeners who don't know, I'm former evangelical Christian, and we talked about this in previous episode. You know, I was lucky in that I wasn't from a very culty place, and yet I'm very familiar with this mentality, with this way of thinking. And if it wasn't Jerry Falwell Jr., there are umpteen. We had this conversation. These earrings do not want to stay in my ears.
I just want to just jump out.
Yeah, it's I love these earrings, but they don't want to stay. I need to get better backs. Anyway, a side note, it's not just Jerry Falwell Jr. There has been so many sex scandals involving religious leaders. Even if we just look at people from the Christian church, like for example, in the UK, there was a big scandal with the Church of England clergy, scandals with the Catholic Church. I mean, it's everywhere.
Mhm.
Another one that is very well known is Carl Lentz, the leader of Hillsong. I think it was the LA Hillsong. He was
Uh-huh.
Justin Bieber's pastor. Turned out having quite a few affairs. And I think what's really interesting is understanding some of the mentality behind this. As sex educators, we know that when you start repressing this stuff, it's going to come out in other ways that are really unhealthy,
Yeah.
and also ways that are non-consensual or things that are hypocritical. But
Mm-hmm.
something I've noticed, having been in highly religious communities and being among highly religious communities, is it creates a kind of a psychological splitting, which you have to. Because as humans, we have these desires. Unless you are asexual on the asexuality spectrum, in general, you're going to have these desires, which are completely normal and healthy and part of being a human.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, when you are in a high control environment that is constantly telling you over and over again how bad these are, how wrong these are, you're going to have to squash them down. This is what I did as a teenager. I tried to, and I was a teenage girl, and I had to squash them down and squash them down and squash them down. That does not get you very far. And I've noticed this. I notice it with a lot of highly religious men or men from very high control groups. It creates a kind of psychological splitting where it's almost like they have to split off that part of their personality.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not a psychologist here, but I think it's some sort of phenomena here. And it means that they can end up justifying to themselves when they do behavior that is against their professed beliefs. They will always feel a huge amount of shame for it, but they've had to compartmentalize themselves. And that is not healthy. It's really, it does not lead to a healthy integrated adult. Another one like Josh Duggar.
Prime example of someone who could not integrate probably very normal, healthy behaviors into their life and then led to them doing some really unhealthy shit.
Yeah.
Pedophiles and child abusers, I don't believe that they're programmed from birth that way. I don't think that. I think that they are socialized. I think that they are repressing so much stuff. As you say, it when you are repressing everything, like Christians are no less kinky than the general population.
No.
They're just hiding it. And it's the hiding it that makes behaviors come out in very, very unhealthy ways, very morbid
And
ways, and things that are just
I
awful.
would, I would, I would also say hiding it, having to hide it from themselves. I think there's often a belief that a lot of church-going folk are they're big hypocrites. And there is a lot of hypocrisy, but you have to understand it starts within themselves first, where a lot of the church-going folk or religious folk I've known who have really, they have really struggled with this. And they feel this huge battle within them. And then maybe if you add that personality type, and especially most church environments are misogynistic,
Mhm.
very heavily favored towards men. And so you get this messaging, and by I am overgeneralizing here. I know lots of very progressive Christians. I know people in very progressive churches, which I'm really glad about. But a lot of the church, and I'm saying the church in the umbrella term, whatever denomination, there are different flavors of intensity.
Mhm.
It's very much women, guard your heart, cover up. Men, you are lusty creatures who cannot control yourselves.
Yep.
We have this programming in already, it just amplifies it. And it's also interesting that a lot of other Christian men that I've met, sometimes they will fear so much being a predator, or because they've been taught to fear their sexuality, their desire, their orgasms, that drive to be lusty and carnal. Some of
Mhm.
them will fear it so much that they turn in on themselves
Yeah.
and they become so scared. And I think it's just not a healthy dynamic, whatever way you look at it. And it makes me very sad, as a lot of us feel really sad.
Mhm.
But I think it's also interesting that it's like I can smell it in my life now. Whenever I meet a man who is highly religious, there's a certain something in their energy, something I can read straight away, especially when they are being over righteous or over nice, over polite. I'm like,
Yeah.
I can feel it.
Yeah.
And Yeah. There's so many things that we could go on tangents here. Or what was it? The other one, very apparently very well-known relationship coach, Jackson Derek.
Mm,
Derek Jackson. Derek Jackson.
he's Derek Jackson. Yeah.
So sorry. Derek Jackson, who was a relationship coach and TikTok staff and whatever, a relationship expert. And apparently some of his stuff was really good, but turns out he was having multiple affairs behind his wives.
That's like the Try Guys, Nate from the Try Guys, that came out that he was like he was always doing his content with his wife, and it was like the marriage relationship content, and it turned out he was sleeping with one of his producers, and they kicked him out. And like, I have a hard time putting any stock into people that are allegedly an expert in this or an expert on that, and they've got this huge following. I always kind of feel like I'm just going to sit back and be like, we'll see how long it takes you to fuck up.
I think like what's tricky is that when you are any kind of public figure, no matter how big or small, there is this pressure to have a certain public persona because that is how people are going to perceive you.
Mm-hmm.
And that is going to put a hell of a lot of pressure on you to behave a certain way that isn't always congruent with how you think and feel. And that pressure is going to build over time.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why I'm really very skeptical or feel uneasy about maybe influencers who often tout their own relationship or marriage all the time as an example. And I don't want to, I think first of all, it's very tricky territory. And I also don't want to say they are all bad or not, but I think it's very sticky territory because what happens when you've had a massive fight and then you've got to go on camera and talk about how to bond as a couple? That's so hard. That is so hard. That's going to cause so much strain in your relationship or marriage. Or what you're going to do if you're having a really difficult time and you're thinking about separation, but you have been very public about your marriage or relationship, and people start to notice that your spouse isn't in your content. It's just really difficult. And that pressure cannot always be sustained.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I don't put Matthew in my content much. I mention him sometimes. I occasionally show him, but I really try to not make my entire persona about, look at me and my great sex life and my great relationship, and you should do everything to be like me. And I do find that there's too many people out there who have built up this platform based around that concept. Oh, I did just think of a woman who totally used her power and was an absolute shit. Teal Swan.
Ooh,
let's talk about Teal Swan for a minute. Again, I know that documentary was on Hulu, so you may not have caught that, but you know about Teal Swan.
I listened to the podcast episodes on. My short-term memory is absolutely appalling, but I listened to the podcast series. This podcast series, listened to it, and also back in the day when I was first. So long story short, I went through faith deconstruction, left Christianity, and jumped 2 feet into the spirituality woo conspiracy theory world. I was, and back in the day, I was into Teal Swan as well. I was into Teal Swan, not heavily. I just liked some of her stuff. I wasn't a big, whatever her fan club was called. I wasn't one of those, but I liked a lot of her stuff. And then over time, I just, so many people online, I just drifted away until I started seeing her stuff again years later, thinking, no. But I think what's interesting is a lot of these sex scandals and documentaries all have an element of spirituality, religion, personal growth here. And I think that is something to be aware of, and what can also make people very wary of certain environments. I think what's difficult is when you have somebody believing and touting that they have a version of the truth, and they have a version of what I'm teaching is directly channeled from the divine. So whatever I am teaching and coming through me is the absolute truth. And there are a couple of teachers online, and I notice their students they use the word, they say the word truth a lot, and they spell it with a capital T.
Mm-hmm.
And that immediately puts me on edge. And also, I was in an environment a few years ago that was spirituality and business, that was absolutely a cult-like environment,
Mm-hmm.
and people who went on to go even further than that. And there's a certain thing where you have somebody who is talking online, live streaming, or a pastor from a pulpit, and there's a certain intensity to them. They have this intense eye gaze, and there's this magnetism to them, and they start just riffing. And by the way, I've been in that state myself. And that is something to be very, very, very mindful of when you notice an environment where somebody is just speaking truth, or it feels like it's truth. I'm sure there is, and as I'm saying this, I'm sure there are technical explanations for this. I know this has been studied, and I feel frustrated that I can't name things. But it's something to be really mindful and wary of. If you're in an environment, and it could be any environment, where it feels like there is a leader and people are hanging off their every word, and they're hashtag obsessed with them. They want to get some of that magic. They want to get some of that, oh, I just want to be in their space. Tread very carefully.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like yes, I feel like a lot of times those people, like, I of course watch some Teal Swan videos. We're like, I can totally buy into that. It's a good explanation. That's the problem with a lot of these leaders, is 9 things that they say are truth and actual truth. And then one, or they learned it from someone else. It was just an observation of the world. And then that 10th thing is the thing that makes you go, oh, yeah. But all these other things they said made sense. So like they try to make that 10th thing make sense. So like they're sprinkling in things that are either lies or manipulation, or, things like that.
Things that can go too far. And also remember that a lot of these cult-like environments, part of it is they invite you to suspend your judgment or suspend your critical thinking. And also, this is what also exists in personal development spaces, is part of it is undoing your conditioning, questioning your thoughts, questioning your beliefs. And this is where it can get sticky. I'm saying sticky on a sex podcast, but sticky because there is a lot of that is super helpful. As sex educators, we are constantly talking about, we have to recondition what we think and how we feel about sexuality, and understand that a lot of what we've been taught is lies. And so you have to be aware of that when you start to go down that rabbit hole in terms of what you have been taught is lies, don't believe your thoughts, a lot of that is really helpful. But this can put you down a slippery slope. That's a Christian metaphor. It can very easily slide down. Like one thing I noticed when I was in this group environment a few years ago was, one of the things was, it's good to be triggered. If you're triggered, that is an edge for growth. What is tricky is there is some truth in that. There is some truth in that.
But they're also not the ones that are qualified to take you to that spot. No.
And what it was, it felt like I was constantly questioning my own triggers. And if I'm triggered, it's good. It's good to be triggered. But then it became a thing of, it's all feeling constantly triggered. And a lot of these teachers, their intention is to trigger you. And this is where, again, really murky gray zone, because I've seen people who end up, you can convince people to believe anything. And that is where it gets super, super dangerous, super tricky, especially if you convince people that their quote unquote resistance, or their uncomfortable feelings, are just resistance that needs to be pushed through.
Yeah.
Which is not always psychologically safe.
No.
And this is where, it's like, there's so many tangents I could go on this, but thinking about all of the sex scandals and sex clubs and all of these things, it's when you're in environments where you are constantly encouraged or taught to override what your own experience is.
Yeah.
And not trust yourself and your own boundaries.
Yeah. Another documentary was the one about One Taste. What was the title of that one though? I forget.
Orgasm Inc.
Yes, thank you.
on
Orgasm
Netflix.
Inc.
I watched that documentary. That was very interesting.
I know someone who he is into the whole oming thing. We can get into that in a second. But he went to one taste when he lived in San Francisco briefly and said after, because I texted him after I watched that when I was recovering, and said, "Hey, I know you did oming and stuff in San Francisco. Did you ever go to one taste?" He was like, "Yes." And I just watched the documentary. And the big reason he didn't keep going was because of the culty vibes.
One of my friends and colleagues felt the same. She's from San Francisco and she's like, I went to one of their things, massive culty vibes. And it's also interesting because I have one friend who was very, very into oming and she swore by it for so many things.
Mm-hmm.
And I have two other friends who they love oming as a practice, but hate one taste.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what's really difficult. Like I've tried. I think what's difficult is the practice of oming and also the origins of that practice are a little bit ambiguous.
Yeah.
The practice itself actually is really good, because for women and for clitoris owners, it helps you to track your sensation. It helps you to really be with the orgasmic wave. And the whole point of it is that you do not have sex afterwards. You just stay with the sensation. I think the practice itself can be really beautiful. And for men, if they're doing it in a heterosexual dynamic, it can also be beautiful because it's a way of decoupling orgasms from penetration and then ejaculation. But the difficulty was that you add in, this is a good old thing of spirituality, capitalism, and business. And you take something that is potentially good, you then add spiritual cult dynamics, and then a shitload of money out of this. What could possibly go wrong?
Yes.
What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah.
A lot of things.
Yeah. Well, and this one specifically is focused on, it's not like it's something that evolved into having sexual dynamics, but this was about sexual dynamics and, sexual healing, sexual growth, sexual learning. So people did know what they were getting into with that aspect, but like the power dynamics again were there to allow someone to take advantage of things. And for the listeners that don't know, oming is orgasmic meditation. Again, feel free to Google. I personally, I don't know what I really think about orgasmic meditation. I've never tried it. I don't know anyone around here that teaches. Perhaps there will be a day where I'm able to take a workshop with someone that I trust, whether that be at I don't know, Sex Down South or something else. But I am so wary of it because of what's gone on around it.
You know what's interesting? I was reading the book Pleasure Activism, which was compiled by Adrienne Maree Brown.
I finished that one for the second time recently. Love that book.
So there was one contributor to that, and I'm really sorry, I cannot remember who they are. Again, my short-term memory, but there's one contributor to that who talked, it may have been Adrienne Maree Brown, I'm sorry if it was,
okay,
who said that they love doing oming on themselves as a nurturing, nourishing self-pleasure practice. And of course, the oming purists will say, no, you cannot do it on yourself. It must be done by somebody else. Whereas, well, no, I think you can adapt these practices. And this person found that by practicing oming on themselves, in terms of just stroking their clitoris for, 15 minutes without any goal, was a really beautiful, nourishing practice as a way of riding the waves of pleasure with no agenda at the end. There's also a similar-ish practice called orgasmic yoga, which was created by Joseph Kramer, who pioneered somatic sexology and sexological bodywork. I really love the practice of orgasmic yoga because it's basically learning how to masturbate differently. Going back to oming and one taste, that was difficult to watch, really difficult to watch.
Yeah, it was. There's very few things out there that made me go like, but all that stuff around oming and the culture around it, it gives me the sticky vibes, even more so than the whole tantric community and stuff like that. Like, sticky vibes.
it was sticky, sticky on a sex podcast saying the word sticky. But like it was, I think one of the things that was maybe sticky for me was, well, first of all, that people went there from having a, say, part of traumatic past, big wounding around sex and relationships, which, you know, people who get into a lot of tantra, sacred sexuality stuff and personal development stuff, we don't do it from having had a perfect, wonderful, happy life.
Right.
People get into it from a vulnerable place, which
Yeah.
is completely understandable. And what they wanted was that feeling of connection, of purpose, of something bigger than themselves. And it was just interesting because Nicole Daedone made everything, the solution to everything is orgasm. Everything, any problem you have, the solution is orgasm. The solution is sex. The solution is orgasm. And again, it's back to that one truth, this idea that there is one truth and one solution to everything, which is very convenient, very easy.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, you see in the documentary that she says other things that are just really sketchy, like, mentions of sexual assault, and like, actually, you're in victim mentality, and actually, sexual assault can be a good thing, and actually, there's no such thing as being raped.
Yeah, that clip made me go like, I wanted to throw
Ooh,
something at the TV.
that was really difficult to watch, and
Yeah.
oh, and
I'm
also,
glad she's not doing, I don't know, what is that woman even doing in the world? She's not like Keith Raniere where she's sitting in prison now. But her school's closed, right?
well, apparently, from what I heard, was that she started selling off stocks and selling off the company before before the Bloomberg article was published.
Mm.
So she knew shit was about to hit the fan, and she sold it off to her acolytes. And then she disappeared, and then the article was published, from what I hear. But apparently now she's writing a book on cancel culture. Yeah, I mean, this is another bugbear that I have, is this is me going on a rant about a lot of stuff that happens in the spirituality and personal development world. You have somebody who is outed publicly for very shitty, manipulative, abusive behavior, usually because there were no accountability structures in the first place, usually because people had nowhere to go, usually because they tried to address it privately but were fobbed off and fobbed off and fobbed off and fobbed off.
Mm-hmm.
So it went public. And then this person, instead of saying, oh shit, I fucked up, they seem to double down and go, I'm being cancelled. I'm being silenced for speaking my truth. Oh, it's and also,
yeah,
and it within the Christian world, you have the pastors who are called out, some of them saying it's the devil, it's demonic, it's a satanic attack or something. Again, it's the same fucking playbook. It's the same dynamic. Yeah, so I think Nicole Daedone is writing a book on what it's like on cancel culture and how bad cancel culture is. And rather than, oh yeah, I think I may have fucked up there. I think I may have actually caused a bomb. Sorry, that's a really weird expression, but I may have caused lots of harm.
Yeah. Hopefully all the book reviewers out there see through it and call it out for what it is whenever that book does happen to hit store shelves.
Oh, I can't imagine. I don't know. I don't want to say anything because we live in a very polarized world right now. But I think it's just really important to make, when it comes to sex scandals, and of course, nothing prints faster than a sex scandal, nothing gets more clicks than a sex scandal, is like, it's just, in my opinion, it's educating people on cult dynamics and predatory and abusive behavior. And then you can more easily spot it, because like, we can talk about these bad people, quote unquote, these people that have fucked up and caused harm. But then it's very easy to say it was just them. They were just an awful person, and I would never do that. My teacher would never do that because that person is a bad person. Mm-hmm. Rather than understanding this is something that anybody is capable of doing, because humans be humans.
Yeah.
And we have to look for the dynamics. And I also believe that bad faith people do need to be called out. I do believe I'm in a very sticky place with that myself.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, there was one thing in the orgasm documentary that also got me. And it was when someone was saying that Nicole, when she did her coaching, she'd be pushing people to reveal stuff, but she'd be kind of manipulating them as to what she wanted them to say, and then convincing them this is what they really wanted, this was their true desire. And they started realizing, oh, Nicole is telling me that my true desire is to have a public home or whatever, rather. And that also really got me, because she was very much abusing her role in a coaching dynamic and exploiting the vulnerabilities of people around her. Like, also, this is not a sex scandal, but what's her name? Kundalini yoga. Guru Jagat.
Yeah.
Guru Jagat. Not sex related, but the same dynamic, the same shitty behavior, minus the sex part.
Yes. I think that, again, it's Kundalini is just like a lot of these other things that we've talked about, that these things are always founded, and there's a bit that's beneficial. There's a bit that's helpful, but it's the people, it's the players, it's the structures, it's the dynamics that you have to watch out for.
Yeah, the practices themselves can be great, but because I follow the Conspirituality podcast, and there's stuff, I don't agree with everything they say, but one of the posts, something they did a while back, was that you have to remember that in these containers, not Tupperware containers, but in these environments, whether you're working with sex or not, you are leading people through exercises that puts them in a psychologically very vulnerable place.
Yeah.
You're putting them into an altered brain state. That, whether it's through different kinds of meditation, whether it's through worship, whether it's through whatever, it doesn't matter what the exercise is, whether it's a retreat, whether it's a workshop, the exercises in which they are leading you through are taking you to an altered state of consciousness. You are, for all intents and purposes, on drugs. You may be completely sober, but your brain is, for all intents and purposes, on drugs, which means you are highly susceptible to suggestion, which means you are actually in a super vulnerable state.
Very.
Which means it is super easy for somebody to slip in things. Unintended. Oh God, that went dark. But
I've heard professional dominants talk about that they negotiate beforehand, because once you're into playing a scene and that sexual energy and all those neurotransmitters are flowing through your system, it is like you're on drugs. And that if you did not agree to something before the scene, they will not, a professional dom, someone who knows what they're doing, will not alter the plan simply because you suddenly say yes to something that you didn't say yes to before, because your mind is altered and you basically are on drugs, and they don't want to take advantage of that situation.
No, exactly. And this is what happens in these environments, whether you're oming, whether you're doing breath work, Kundalini yoga, it doesn't matter. It's the same kind of effect on your brain, body, nervous system, and which then means you are highly susceptible, which means you are much more likely to push over your internal boundaries and then have a crash afterwards. And this is why I feel iffy, because these kind of practices I think are wonderful if the person leading you through it then will close you down, will bring you down afterwards and tell you aftercare. We know that in BDSM, you're going to have a sub drop. You're going to have a drop. So really take care of yourself. I remember I did a trauma awareness training literally before the start of the pandemic. And the facilitator, she said at the end, don't make any big decisions for 2 weeks afterwards. And I was like, I wish nobody had told me this. She said, do not make any big decisions regarding finances, relationship, marriage. No big decisions for 2 weeks.
Good.
No, of all the containers, of all the environments I've been in, I would get things about have a soft landing, land gently, but no specific advice as to no big decisions. Really go like you're going to be in an altered state for the next week or two. Don't trust yourself in those decisions.
Yeah. Good advice. Good advice. Advice that there's definitely, I've done some things that I wish someone had given me that advice at the end for sure.
Yeah. But this is also how they recruit people in cults. This is we saw in the One Taste documentary. This is how they got people in.
Yeah, they get in
You
that
know,
altered state and they take advantage of that.
go in to take their bank balance. And this is what certain personal development leaders who are very well known, who are currently spamming my Instagram and YouTube newsfeed with their ads all over, who shall remain nameless, does is as part of his shtick. He leads people through intense 5-day or 3-day things where people are exhausted at the end, rams in the sales pitch.
Yeah. Well, for those listening who do want to watch these, feel free. But if you want something that feels a little bit better, or maybe you've already watched these and you have the icks like we do, I would say start with How to Build a Sex Room on Netflix.
Yeah.
That, oh my God, I've gotten so many calls from new clients since that show. There were definitely some things I wish could have been displayed better, but I feel like she did an overall really good job of having a really diverse set of people that she was working with, diverse kinks, diverse sexual wants, desires, needs. And she really did a good job, I think, of tailoring to each couple's needs rather than telling them what they needed in their sex room.
Yeah. I liked it in that some of it felt very fluffy, and in terms, some of it felt very wholesome. And you might not think of that like a sex room, potential BDSM is wholesome, but something felt really wholesome because she's going on and on about the decor and her passion for decor and like giving people a really wonderful environment. And I just was like, oh, it got me in the feels when I'm watching that. And she's like so pleasure affirming, like, oh, this is wonderful. Oh, I'm going to make this room of your dreams.
Yes. She felt like the very sex positive auntie that's got really good style.
And I don't think I was the only one who was like, damn it, I don't have a sex room. Damn it. Damn it, I need a sex room. I don't have a sex room. I know. Create.
What it made me want is penis decor.
Oh,
there was like penis like hooks and stuff like that, like, or like, you know, some gold penises that she had as wall decor. There was like a penis lamp at one point. Oh, and the one closet handle pulls that were naked ladies, kind of like in this. Like, it was the little details on stuff like that. I was like, I need more feathers. I need a crystal chandelier, and I need penis decor.
Oh, I was thinking, I don't know, because we've just moved countries, me and my husband. So we've been living in our new apartment only since the end of October. So half of our, you may see, some of our stuff is still in boxes. So we are still in this like decor, trying to figure everything out in our apartment. I'm like, damn it, this is another thing I need to do now because I really want a sex our bedroom.
I want
yeah. I want a sex room. I want our current bedroom to be more like that. I
yes.
need feathers, and I need throws, and I need a special sex couch.
I want sex furniture so bad. The one that's like slopey and yes, I want
it to be covered in velvet.
Yes, I was like, ooh, we could have a velvet headboard and we could have like the harness come over, like just have like little hooks in the back so we don't have to search for them. Yeah, it gave me all sorts of ideas for our new home that we moved into. And luckily, Matthew was on board. I mean, you can't be the spouse of a sexologist and not be on board with some sexy stuff going on in your house, I think.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm always joking with my husband that, you know, there's always vulvas everywhere around our place, and, you know, erotic art. And he's just like, oh, there's a penis here. Okay.
I love it.
Were we also going to talk about sex, love, and goop?
Yes, we can talk about that one in the last few minutes for sure. And like the Goop Lab, which had Betty Dotson on. I didn't actually watch the Goop Lab because I'm not a Gwyneth fan, but I did watch the Betty Dotson episode.
Yeah. I mean, same. I only watched the Betty Dodson episode of the Goop Lab because I'm similar. I think this is what's tricky, is that I'm not a Gwyneth Paltrow fan, and yet I really like what she did with the Betty Dodson episode, and I really like what she did with Sex, Love and Goop.
Same.
And I've seen some criticisms of Sex, Love and Goop that I don't agree with at all.
Same.
And yeah, and that's what's tricky. And like I always recommend my clients watch Sex, Love and Goop, because it's really accessible on a way of them also seeing elements of their own relationships mirrored in the couples. I really like that she included a wide range of different educators.
Yes.
With different backgrounds. I really like that. I like that they showed a sexological bodywork session pretty much. They showed like the mirror exercise. They showed and they showed the episodes with Jaya and the erotic blueprints. And like, again, I have mixed opinions of Jaya, but I do like the erotic blueprints as kind of a metaphor, as a way of people understanding that there's different ways of getting turned on.
Yeah.
So, and I just like what they did with it. And I think that they gave a really good representation of sex coaching per se as an industry, in a way that they showed it being done in a good way, I thought. And I just liked that it's really accessible for somebody who is maybe not from the sex positive world, but just wants to make their relationship or marriage better and doesn't know where to start.
Yes.
This is what I liked.
I 100% agree with your dire assessment there, actually. That was very much how I felt, and loving seeing multiple practitioners with different modalities, seeing a diverse group of the clients, the guests that are on, the couples that are on, having different issues, and then there being different solutions for them. I do also like the erotic blueprints. I'm not so sure what to think about the whole energetic orgasm thing.
Yeah,
but then the way the couple played with it, I was like, okay, but that, I get that. I could feel that.
Yeah, I agree. I liked that it showed this guy who, like, is it the heterosexual couple, and they seem to be having a very typical heterosexual couple issue, whereas the guy, I just want to have sex, I'm just hard, I want to go straight in, whereas the woman's like, whoa, slow down, mate. And Jaya, through the erotic blueprints, helped them to find that way in the middle. And I loved her doing this, not the bodywork session, but the energetic session on the man. And like him, you could see his body responding, and like him having his own energy orgasms or something. And for me, watching that, it was like, oh, it's so beautiful and so humbling. And I gets me in the feels. I really want people to see that, and to see that. And I say it's like a typical heterosexual couple issue. You may probably have that experience as well. And to see that there's a different way of connecting with that.
Yeah.
And like, one thing I'd say in terms of the criticism of Sex, Love and Goop, there's a lot of sex educators who are criticizing it. And I understand why, but I think we have to remember that as sex educators, we want a lot of this stuff to be more mainstream. And the issue with anything going mainstream is that there's going to be funkiness. It was like 50 Shades of Grey. Do I agree with the writing? Do I agree with the portrayal of BDSM? No. But it made BDSM more into mainstream awareness, and it was women reading it and going to see the film to get off. So I think this is a pitfall whenever we want something to be mainstream. Whenever anything goes mainstream, there's going to be stuff that goes wrong, and that's just how it is.
Absolutely. I saw some of those criticisms as well. People saying things like, well, this is just going to make everyone think that they can come to me and ask for sexological body work. I'm like, okay, first off, I was already having that issue, having to make the distinction between what coaching and sexological body work are, and what I do and what I don't do. So that's no different. But I feel because of some of the conversations that are going on through the Goop Lab or other things like that, people are coming to us now more openly. I want everyone to have a wonderful, healthy, beautiful sex life. And if the thing that makes them recognize they deserve that is that show, okay, I'm okay with that.
Same. And it's I saw criticism like they're not licensed therapists. And that really annoyed me because it's like there's a limit to that. And that these people are very good practitioners. And that
Yeah.
really annoyed me. Like,
Yeah, and there's plenty of licensed therapists who have said really dumb things to my clients in the past.
oh yeah, same. I've
So,
had clients have terrible experiences with licensed therapists. No shade to licensed therapists, by the way. That I know some brilliant ones. It's just
same.
this whole thing of it's all snake oil, it's all this, rather than actually there's a lot of stuff that's good there. So
Therapists are human beings, and it's just like anything. You don't like every dentist you go to. You don't like every general practitioner you go to. You don't even like every fucking mechanic you take your car to. There's good ones and there's bad ones. There's people who listen to you and people who take advantage of you. A therapist, physician, they're no different. It is up to us to find quality therapists, people who are informed. You got to try them out for fit and quality, just like you do anything else.
licensed therapists, like all practitioners, have their own biases according to their own training. I know that I have biases according to my training.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe it's, what's it, horses for courses. Different practitioners, different professionals for different needs at different times. And also having some awareness of when to spot shady behavior and potential red flags. This is why it's a very, it's a very, very sticky territory.
Yeah.
Again,
I agree.
using that word.
Well, and that's why we had this conversation today, to help people understand, more about what to watch for. We've got these examples of these cults or these folks that were not practicing good, power dynamics, and hopefully it helps people know what to watch out for moving forward as they are exploring themselves, or if they do want to go explore Tantra, just be aware. If you do want to go explore oming, be aware. That's all we ask.
Trust your own, trust your feelings. What's the word? If your spidey senses are off, trust that.
Yes.
If something doesn't feel right for you, trust that. And try and trust that above what they are telling you.
100%. Well, Lucy, this has been a wonderful conversation, as expected. So in the last few minutes that we have here, if you would, go ahead and let the folks know how they can find you online.
Awesome. So I am very active on Instagram, which is at Lucy Rowett. I do use TikTok occasionally, which is at Lucy Rowett. Find me on my website, lucyrowett.com. I can send you a link in the show notes. What do I have? I have a free workbook on how to confidently ask what you want in bed. We're going to be opening up the doors to my next group program, the Shameless Woman Immersion. So if you are interested in any of what I have said, or you are curious about working together, do reach out. I'm very responsive to emails or private messages on Instagram. Just know that I can't provide sex coaching on Instagram. I just provide, what's the word? Not signaling. Signposting. That's the word. Signposting, not signaling. Yes.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, thank you again so much for being my guest today on Keep Them Coming and talking about all these sex cult scandals, the good, the bad, and the ugly of what's out there on the internet right now.
We're like adding that in.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right. Well, I wish you all the best, and I'll talk to you soon.
Bye.